She grabbed the microphone out of the MC's hand in front of 500 people, and the entire ballroom went dead silent. Clara Hale, billionaire, CEO, wheelchair-bound, untouchable, pointed across the crowd at a man in a maintenance uniform and said 4 words. Nobody in that room ever expected to hear from the most powerful woman in America. But here's what nobody knew yet, that man had already decided to quit his job that very morning. And what happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have survived alone. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and follow along. This one's going to stay with you. There are women who are born into power. And then there are women who build it brick by brick, scar by scar, out of the wreckage of everything that tried to destroy them. Clara Hale was the second kind. At 44 years old, she ran Hale Dynamics, a $2.7 billion industrial tech firm headquartered in downtown Chicago. She had been featured on the cover of Forbes twice. She had testified before Congress. She had personally fired 3 CFOs in 8 years and not lost a single night of sleep over any of them. She was also completely devastatingly alone, not in the way. People talk about loneliness at dinner parties, that soft, comfortable sadness that sounds poetic when you say it out loud. No. Clara's loneliness was the kind that lived in the bones. The kind you stop noticing after a while because it becomes part of your structure, like calcium, like marrow. It holds you upright. It keeps you moving. But it is always there. She had not been on a date in 9 years. She had not let anyone hold her hand in 7. She had not cried genuinely privately for herself in longer than she could remember. What she had done was work, relentlessly, brilliantly, with a focus that her executive team privately called terrifying and her competitors called inhuman. She arrived at the office before dawn and left after midnight, and in between she made decisions that moved markets, reshaped supply chains, and occasionally ended careers. Nobody questioned her judgment. Nobody dared, and that was exactly how Clara preferred it. The wheelchair had been part of her life for 11 years now. A car accident on a rain-soaked stretch of I-90 on a Tuesday evening in October. She had been 33 years old, coming home late from a client dinner, when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit the driver's side of her car at 60 miles an hour. She remembered the sound. She did not remember much else from those first hours. She remembered the ceiling of the hospital. She remembered a nurse whose name tag said Donna and who smelled like lavender soap. She remembered the moment a doctor sat down at the edge of her bed and used the word permanent. She did not cry then either. What she did 3 months later, once the physical therapy had plateaued and the prognosis had been confirmed, and everyone around her had finished grieving on her behalf, was call her attorney and begin restructuring her company. She had been running a mid-size engineering consulting firm at the time. Smart operation, good reputation, modest revenue. It was successful enough. But successful enough had never really satisfied Clara Hale even before the accident. After it, she became someone different. She became someone who understood at a cellular level that time was not a resource to be managed. It was a wound that bled whether you paid attention to it or not. And so you might as well build something while you still had blood left. Over the next decade, she did exactly that. She hired smarter. She acquired faster. She expanded into sectors that traditional investors thought were too risky and proved them wrong consistently with a kind of quiet precision that bordered on arrogance. Except that arrogance implies you might be wrong, and Clara was rarely wrong. By 40, she had crossed the billion-dollar threshold. By 43, she had doubled it, and somewhere in the process of becoming one of the most powerful executives in the country, she had stopped being a person who wanted things for herself. She had only goals now. Targets, quarterly benchmarks, milestones. She had stopped wanting love, the way you stop wanting something when you've convinced yourself you can't have it, not dramatically, not all at once but slowly, like water finding its level. It just became easier to not want it, simpler, cleaner. Until the elevator. It was a Thursday morning in late March. Clara had arrived at the Hale Dynamics Tower at 6:47 a.m., which was for her slightly late. She'd had a call with a London office at 5:30 that had run long, and she was still mentally sorting through the implications of a contract dispute when she rolled into the executive elevator on the ground floor and pressed the button for the 32nd floor. The doors closed. The elevator moved, or began to. It rose perhaps 6 feet, maybe 8, and then it stopped. Not the smooth hydraulic stop of a normal floor arrival. A lurch. A shudder. Then nothing. The lights flickered. Emergency lighting kicked on dim orange-yellow institutional. Clara sat in her wheelchair in the center of the elevator cab and looked at the emergency intercom panel on the wall. She was not afraid. She was annoyed. She had a 7:15 with her COO and a 7:45 briefing with the acquisition team, and this was going to cascade. She pressed the emergency button. A buzzer sounded. Once. Twice. Then static. Then a voice. Building maintenance. This is Ryan. I'm reading a fault signal on executive elevator 2. Can you hear me? The voice was calm. Not the performative calm of someone trying not to panic, but the kind of calm that comes from a person who has dealt with real problems before and has stopped being surprised by them. I can hear you, Clara said. The elevator stopped between the ground floor and the first. There was a lurch. Okay, the voice said. Are you hurt? No. Are you alone in there? Yes. A brief pause. She could hear him moving the sound of a panel being opened somewhere below or beside the shaft, a metallic scrape footsteps. All right, he said. I'm going to need about 8 minutes to get eyes on the control board. The fault code I'm seeing suggests a magnetic brake issue, not dangerous, just stubborn. Can you stay on the line with me? I'm not going anywhere, Clara said with exactly the kind of dry precision that made her executive team nervous. There was a beat of silence. Then the voice Ryan said, That's fair. And for some reason, Clara could not immediately identify that response, made something loosen slightly in her chest. 8 minutes became 12. The magnetic brake issue turned out to be more stubborn than anticipated, and Ryan, still on the intercom, still moving, still calm, talked her through each step of what he was doing with the kind of unself-conscious, matter-of-fact transparency that Clara almost never encountered in professional settings. Most people, when they talked to Clara Hale, were performing, selling, protecting, managing up. This man was just talking to her. Okay, the secondary relay is stuck, he said. I'm going to manually reset it, but I need to kill power to the cab for about 40 seconds. The lights will go out completely. Emergency battery should hold, but there'll be about a 5-second gap before the backup comes on. I'm telling you now, so you're not sitting in the dark, wondering what happened. Clara found herself oddly grateful for the warning. Understood, she said. You good? I'm fine. Another brief pause. Then, you sure? Because it's okay if you're not. Elevator malfunctions are legitimately unpleasant. Most people I talk through these don't sound as steady as you. Clara considered that for a moment. I've sat through worse, she said. And she meant it. Yeah, Ryan said quietly. I think you probably have. She didn't know why that struck her the way it did. It wasn't sympathy. There was nothing pitying in his voice. It was something more like recognition. Like someone acknowledging simply and without fanfare that hard things had happened and had been survived. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said something like that to her without making it about themselves. Cutting power now, Ryan said. 5, 4, 3. The lights went out. Complete darkness. Clara sat in her wheelchair in the black, and she breathed, and she was, to her own mild surprise, entirely calm. The backup lighting came on exactly when he said it would. 3 minutes later, the elevator moved. It descended smoothly to the ground floor, and the doors opened, and there he was. Ryan Cooper was not what she expected. She wasn't sure what she'd expected exactly. She hadn't been picturing anything in particular. But he was standing just outside the elevator doors with a toolkit in one hand and a tablet in the other. and he was looking at her with the same expression he'd had in his voice, steady, direct, no particular agenda. I was tall. Work-worn hands. A few days of stubble going slightly gray at the jaw. There were lines around his eyes that came from squinting in direct light from years of practical physical work, from a life that had not been entirely easy. He was objectively an attractive man. Clara registered this the way she registered most data accurately, without particular sentiment. What she was not prepared for was the way he looked at her, not at the wheelchair, not past her the way many people did, the unconscious avoidance of eye contact that wheelchair users learn to recognize early and learn to stop being wounded by. Not with the exaggerated cheerfulness that people sometimes deployed as a substitute for genuine engagement. He just looked at her. "Everything working okay?" he asked. "Perfectly," Clara said. "Thank you." "No problem." He made a note on his tablet. "You're Ms. Hale." "I am." He nodded, tapped something on the screen. "I'm going to pull the elevator from service for the rest of the morning until I can get a full inspection done. There's another executive elevator on the north end of the lobby 40 feet that way." He gestured. "I'll let your team know." "I appreciate that," Clara said. She moved to go. And then, for a reason, she would spend the next 3 weeks trying to explain to herself, she stopped. "Ryan," she said. He looked up. "What you said about telling me before the power cut, warning me what was coming." She paused. "That was considerate. People don't usually bother." He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "Seems like the kind of thing that matters," he said finally. "Knowing what's coming." She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was professionally standard. Then she rolled toward the north elevator, and she did not look back. But for the rest of that day, through the 7:45 briefing, and the 11 o'clock acquisition call, and the lunch she ate alone at her desk, while reviewing a merger proposal, she kept hearing that voice. Steady, direct, no performance. And she thought about what it meant to simply tell someone what was coming. And how rarely in her entire life anyone had ever done that for her. She didn't see him again for 11 days. She noticed she was noticing his absence, which was itself alarming. Clara was not a woman given to noticing people. She cataloged them, their competencies, their loyalties, their leverage points. But she did not notice them in this particular way, the way you notice a song you can't stop hearing. On the 12th day, the thermostat in the executive conference room on 32 malfunctioned, and her assistant forwarded the maintenance work order. And 40 minutes later, Ryan Cooper knocked on the open door. "Ms. Hale, building maintenance." She was at the head of the conference table alone reviewing contracts. "The thermostat," she said without looking up. "West wall." "Got it." He came in. She heard him working methodical, efficient, no unnecessary sound. She kept her eyes on the page in front of her. "You warned me again," she said. A pause. "I'm sorry." "You knocked. The door was open. Most maintenance workers would have just come in." She looked up. "You knocked." He considered this. "It's your space," he said simply. Seemed right to ask. She held his gaze. "Sit down," she said. He blinked. "I'm sorry. Finish the thermostat first, then sit down." She turned back to her contracts. "I have a question for you." He fixed the thermostat in 4 minutes. Then he pulled out a chair, not the executive chair, not the one right next to her, but a chair across the table, a respectful distance, and sat down. "What's the question?" he asked. "Why maintenance?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Why CEO?" he said back, and Clara Hale, for the first time in longer than she could remember, smiled. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. Her assistant called twice. She let both calls go. Ryan had started in electrical work out of trade school, had moved through 3 different building management companies over 15 years, had ended up at Hale Dynamics Tower 2 years ago. He spoke about his work the way people speak about things they've chosen deliberately, not as a fallback, not as a consolation prize, but as a genuine and considered decision. "There's something honest about it," he said. Something breaks. You fix it. You can see what you did. Most work doesn't give you that. Most work doesn't, Clara agreed. Your work must be different. My work, she said, is almost entirely abstract. I move numbers. I move people. I restructure systems that most people never see. She paused. I don't often get to see what I fixed. Does that bother you? She looked at him. Nobody asked her questions like that. Not her board, not her executives, not the journalists who interviewed her. They asked about strategy, about revenue, about her journey. They didn't ask what bothered her. Sometimes, she said honestly. Ryan nodded, like that was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. I should let you get back to your work, he said and stood. Ryan. He paused. Same time next week, she said. The air filtration unit on this floor is overdue for maintenance. Make sure you're the one assigned to it. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll check the schedule, he said. And he left. And Clara sat alone in the conference room and looked at the contracts she had not read for 47 minutes, and for the first time in years, she did not care. Over the next 6 weeks, it became a quiet ritual, not romantic, not explicit, just conversations, honest ones, the kind Clara had stopped believing she was capable of having. He told her about growing up in rural Indiana, about a father who worked 2 jobs and a mother who left when he was 12, about the particular kind of self-reliance that grows in a boy who understands early that nobody is coming to save him. He told her without bitterness, without drama, in the plain and unsentimental language of someone who has made peace with his history. She told him things she had never told anyone, about the accident, about the first year after, about the board members who had tried to use her recovery period to push her out, and how she had fought back methodically, surgically, without mercy. About the moment she realized she'd won and felt nothing. About the particular loneliness of competence, the way being very good at something eventually seals you inside it, like amber. You ever think about just stopping? He asked her once. Just being a person for a while. She considered it seriously. I don't know how to do that anymore, she said. You're doing it right now, he said. She looked at him. And the terrifying, undeniable truth was that he was right. But 6 weeks after the elevator at 9:47 on a Wednesday evening, Clara sat alone in her office on the 32nd floor and looked at the Chicago skyline and had a thought that frightened her more than any board meeting, any acquisition battle, any hostile press cycle she had ever survived. I want to see him tomorrow. Not for a maintenance reason, not with a pretext. Just to see him. She sat with that thought for a long time. Then she called her assistant and asked her to confirm that the mechanical inspection on the lobby HVAC system was scheduled for Thursday morning. And she told herself that was the only reason. But she knew sitting there in the dark above the city, with the lights of a million lives blinking below her, that something inside her had cracked open quietly, without permission, against every wall she had built. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. She would figure that out very soon. In a way, nobody in that building, including Ryan Cooper, would ever expect. The Thursday morning HVAC inspection took 11 minutes. Clara knew because she watched the clock. Ryan arrived at 7:20, signed in at the lobby desk, the way he always did, and came up to the 32nd floor with his toolkit and his tablet, and that same unhurried, deliberate way of moving through space that she had started to recognize, the way you recognize a particular piece of music, not by thinking about it, but by the way your body responds before your mind catches up. She didn't go to him. She stayed in her office. She had a call at 7:30 and 2 back-to-back meetings after that. And she was not the kind of woman who rearranged her morning because a maintenance worker was in the building. She told herself that clearly and precisely. And then, at 7:18, 2 minutes before he was scheduled to arrive, she moved her 7:30 call to 8:15 without explanation. She didn't examine why. She rolled out of her office at 7:22, took the hallway toward the mechanical room, and found him crouched beside the floor-level return vent with a diagnostic reader in his hand. He looked up when he heard her coming. He didn't look surprised. "Morning," he said. "How's it looking?" she asked. "Dust accumulation on the secondary filter. Nothing serious. 20 more minutes and it'll be clean." He went back to work. "You didn't have to come down here." "I was passing through." He didn't say anything to that, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that told her he wasn't fooled and that he was too decent to say so out loud. She stayed anyway. She sat near the window at the end of the hall, ostensibly looking at her phone, and he worked, and occasionally one of them said something, and the other responded, and it was the most natural 20 minutes she'd had at that office in longer than she could calculate. When he finished, he stood, packed his kit, and looked at her directly. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Not Ms. Hale, not ma'am, not the careful professional distance that everyone else maintained around her like a force field. Just her name. She felt it land somewhere in her sternum. "Ryan," she said back, equally quiet. "I want to say something, and I want to say it straight, because I think that's the only way you'd want to hear it." She held still. "Go ahead." "I like talking to you," he said. "I think about our conversations after they're done. I look forward to the next one." He paused. "I'm aware that's probably not appropriate given the situation, and I'm not saying it to make anything complicated. I just think you deserve to know that someone looks forward to talking to you. Not because of what you run or what you've built. Just you." The hallway was quiet. 32 floors below them, the city was in full morning motion. Up here, everything had gone very still. Clara looked at him for a long time without speaking. In business, she had learned that silence was a tool that most people rushed to fill it and revealed themselves in the filling. She had used silence as a weapon for 2 decades. This was not that. This was her genuinely not knowing what to say, which was a sensation so unfamiliar, it took her a moment to identify it. "That's a brave thing to say," she said finally. "Not really," he said. "Honest, maybe. Brave would be saying it to someone who made me nervous." He picked up his kit. "You make me a lot of things, Clara. Nervous isn't one of them." He left. And she sat in the hallway for another 4 minutes, looking at nothing, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, shift and resettle inside her chest, like furniture being rearranged in a house she'd thought was locked. She was in trouble. She knew it with the same clarity she brought to everything else, clean, certain, unambiguous. She was absolutely in trouble. The question was what she intended to do about it. Clara Hale had not survived what she'd survived by ignoring clear signals. She called her executive assistant from the hallway. "Diane, clear my Thursday lunches for the next month." A pause. "All of them." "All of them." Another pause. Diane had worked for her for 6 years and had learned not to ask follow-up questions that weren't strictly necessary. "Done. Anything else?" "No. Thank you." She hung up. She had not thought through what she was going to do with those lunch hours. She only knew that she needed space she hadn't carved out yet for something she hadn't done in a very long time. She needed to think about herself, not about the company, not about the quarterly numbers or the board or the acquisition pipeline, about herself. It felt almost transgressive. She let it. The following Tuesday, Ryan was assigned to replace a section of conduit on the 28th floor. Clara found out from the morning maintenance log, which she had never in her career read before, and which she now checked with the focused attention she usually reserved for financial statements. She went to the 28th floor at noon. She brought 2 coffees from the executive kitchen. Black for her. She didn't know how he took his, so she brought sugar packets and creamer on the side, and felt for just a moment something almost like nervous. She found him in the utility corridor halfway through the conduit work, his sleeves rolled up and a streak of industrial grease along his left forearm. He looked up, saw the coffee. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but warmer. You looked up my assignment, he said. The maintenance log is a company document, she said. I'm the CEO. That's a yes, he said. She held out one of the cups. How do you take it? Black is fine. She kept the black one and handed him the other. He looked at the cup she'd given him, the one with the sugar and creamer packets tucked against the side, and he laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and it hit her somewhere she hadn't been hit in a long time. You brought options, he said. I didn't want to assume. Clara Hale, he said, amused. And something else, something softer. Brought me coffee because she didn't want to assume. Don't make it strange, she said. I'm not making it anything, he said. I think it's one of the nicest things anyone's done for me in a while. I'm just noting that. She looked at her coffee cup. Ryan, she said. Yeah. I don't know how to do this. The words came out before she'd fully constructed them, which was not how Clara Hale operated. She built sentences. She chose words with the same precision she chose strategies. She did not say things before she knew exactly what she meant. But there it was. He didn't rush to fill the silence this time. He sat down on a nearby equipment crate, held his coffee in both hands, and waited. I haven't, she started. Stopped. Started again. There are parts of a person that you just put away. You decide they're not functional anymore. They're inefficient. They complicate things. And after enough time, you stop checking on them. You assume they've just atrophied, gone quiet. She looked up at him. And then something happens that tells you they haven't. Ryan was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Not pity, not eagerness. Something more like the way you'd look at something rare that you hadn't expected to find. What happened? He asked quietly. You happened, she said simply. Which is inconvenient and frankly disruptive, and I'm not entirely sure what to do with it. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I notice about you, he said. I imagine you'll tell me. You apologize for wanting things, he said. Not in words, but in the way you explain yourself, like you have to justify it, like wanting something for yourself needs a reason. She didn't respond immediately. Doesn't it? She said at last. No, he said. No, it really doesn't. She looked at him for a long time. I fired a man last month, she said, for presenting a proposal without adequate data support. I told him in front of his entire team. I didn't hesitate. She paused. Right now, I'm sitting in a utility corridor telling a maintenance worker that my feelings are inconvenient and I feel more exposed than I have in 11 years. Because with him, Ryan said, it was business. She met his eyes. Yeah, she said quietly. Because with him, it was business. They sat with that for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. When's the last time you did something that had nothing to do with the company? Not a business dinner, not a networking thing, just something for you. She thought about it honestly, which meant she thought about it for longer than felt comfortable. I can't remember, she said. He nodded slowly, not judging, just taking it in. There's a farmer's market, he said. Saturday mornings, over by the Riverwalk. I go most weekends. It's accessible, good wide paths, no cobblestones. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said everything, without the particular delicacy that most people deployed around the subject of her chair. If you wanted to be somewhere that had nothing to do with work. She looked at him. Are you asking me to meet you there? She said. I'm telling you where I'll be Saturday morning, he said. What you do with that information is your business. And he went back to the conduit. Clara rolled back to the elevator with her coffee, and she did not tell herself a single lie about why she was already calculating what time she needed to leave on Saturday to be at the Riverwalk before 8. She was there at 7:53. He was already there. I was standing near a vegetable stand with a canvas bag over one shoulder, talking to an older woman who was clearly the vendor, and he was laughing at something she'd said. An open, easy laugh, the kind that people have when they are genuinely comfortable in their surroundings, when they belong somewhere, not because of status or position, but simply because they show up consistently and are decent to people. He saw Clara across the path. He raised one hand in greeting. Not a wave, just a lift of the hand. Unhurried, like it was perfectly ordinary for her to be there. She moved toward him, and the older woman glanced over and smiled, and went back to arranging her produce, and Ryan handed Clara a small paper bag without preamble. "Peaches," he said. "She grows them downstate. They're incredible." Clara looked at the bag, then at him. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way that went slightly beyond the peaches. She rolled. He walked along the path for the better part of an hour. They talked about nothing particularly important. He knew the vendors by name, and she watched him interact with them, easy, warm, reciprocal, and she thought about the kind of life that looked like this, small and consistent, and rooted in the places and people you return to regularly. She had never built anything like that. She had built an empire. She was starting to wonder for the first time which one mattered more. "You're quiet," he said somewhere near the coffee stand. "I'm thinking," she said. "About work." "No," she said, and surprised herself. "Not about work." He looked at her. Good. They got coffee from a stand, run by a young guy with an elaborate pour-over setup, and Ryan paid before Clara could, and she opened her mouth to object, and he said, "Don't," without looking at her, and something about the casualness of it, the complete absence of calculation, made her close her mouth and accept the cup. They found a spot near the river, wide enough for her chair, with the water visible through the trees, and they sat in the morning light and didn't say much, and it was the first time in years that Clara Hale had been somewhere and not felt the pull of somewhere she was supposed to be instead. "Ryan," she said. Do you ever feel like your life is very far away from the one you expected?" He thought about it genuinely, the way he always did, without rushing to reassure her or redirect. "Every day," he said. "But I stopped thinking of that as a bad thing." "Why?" "Because the life I expected," he said, "I built out of what other people thought was possible for me. The one I'm actually living." He paused. "That one I built myself. It's smaller in some ways, but it's real." She turned that over. "Mine is enormous," she said, "and sometimes it feels like someone else built it." "Did they?" She considered it honestly. "No," she said slowly. "I built it. Every piece of it. But I built it as an argument, as a proof. I was so busy proving something that I never stopped to ask whether what I was building was what I actually wanted." "And what did you want?" She looked at the water. "I'm still figuring that out," she said. "That's okay," Ryan said. 44 is not too late to start." She looked at him sharply. He shrugged. "I know your age. You're a public figure. I looked you up. And I thought this woman has been through an extraordinary amount, and she's still going, still building, still sharp." He held her gaze. "And she brings coffee options because she didn't want to assume, which tells you everything you actually need to know." Clara looked away before he could see exactly what that did to her face. "You're surprisingly easy to be around," she said when she had her voice arranged correctly. "You say that like it's unusual." "For me," she said, "it is." He didn't respond to that with sympathy or reassurance. He just nodded, like it was useful information, like he was filing it under things worth knowing about her. Which she realized was exactly what she would have done. They were, she thought, not entirely different. Except he had built a life that let him breathe. And she had built one that barely let her sleep. She stayed until the market started thinning out, which was longer than she had planned. When she finally said she needed to go, he walked with her to the parking structure where her driver was waiting, and they stopped at the entrance, and there was a moment, brief, charged, the kind of moment you don't manufacture and can't control, where neither of them said anything. "Same time next week," she said finally. He looked at her, and something in his expression was so straightforward, so completely without game or agenda, that it almost undid her. "Saturday mornings," he said. "I'll be there." She nodded and moved toward the car. Clara. She stopped. You asked me last week what you should do with what you were feeling, he said. You didn't ask that exactly, but that's what you meant. She waited. I don't think you need to do anything, he said. I think you just need to stop running from it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she went to her car, and she told her driver she needed a few minutes before they left, and she sat in the back seat with the paper bag of peaches in her lap, and something behind her eyes that she hadn't let surface in a very long time. She did not cry. But she came closer than she had in 11 years, and somewhere in the distance between almost and not yet, she understood that the wall she'd built, the one she'd mortared with work and status and relentless forward motion, had developed a crack. Not from force, not from impact. From something far more dangerous. From someone who simply looked at her without flinching and said, I look forward to talking to you. Not because of what you've built, just because of you. She had spent 11 years making herself impossible to reach. She had not anticipated that the right person would simply knock on the door instead of trying to break it down. And that she would open it. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without even fully deciding to. The fourth Saturday at the farmer's market it rained. Not a drizzle. A real Chicago rain. The kind that comes in off the lake with intent, heavy and cold, and indifferent to whatever plans you had. Most of the vendors had packed up by 7:30. The paths along the Riverwalk were empty, except for a few determined joggers, and one woman in a wheelchair, and one man standing under the overhang of a closed coffee stand, both of them looking at each other across 20 feet of wet pavement, like neither one had thought to check the forecast, and neither one was particularly sorry about it. You came, Ryan said. You came, Clara said back. He looked at her rain-damp hair pulled back, no makeup, no armor. Just her face in the gray morning light, and he said, Yeah, I wasn't going to miss it. She moved under the overhang beside him. They stood there for a moment, listening to the rain hit the pavement. Everything's closed, he said. I know. We could go somewhere else. There's a diner 2 blocks up. Good coffee, nothing fancy. She looked at him. Nothing fancy sounds exactly right. The diner was narrow and warm and smelled like bacon grease and old wood, and the waitress, a woman named Pat, according to her name tag, who had the manner of someone who had seen everything and retained a fond opinion of most of it, seated them at a corner table near the window, without batting an eye at the wheelchair, or at the fact that the two of them looked like they'd walked through a car wash. Coffee? Pat asked. Please, they said simultaneously. Pat looked between them, nodded with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has just confirmed a theory, and left. Ryan put his elbows on the table and looked at Clara directly, the way he always did. Like eye contact was a courtesy rather than a challenge. Tell me something you've never told anyone, he said. She raised an eyebrow. That's a significant ask for 8 in the morning. The rain gives us cover, he said. Nobody's listening. She looked at her coffee cup when Pat brought it, wrapped both hands around it, and thought about it genuinely. After the accident, she said slowly. When I was in rehab, there was a physical therapist named Marcus. Young guy, maybe 28. He was good at his job. He didn't talk down to me, and he didn't pretend things were easier than they were. She paused. One afternoon, about 6 weeks in, he told me I was making exceptional progress. And I said thank you. And then he left the room, and I sat there, and I thought, I don't want to make exceptional progress. I don't want to be inspiring. I just want to go back to being unremarkable. Ryan didn't say anything. I had been before the accident, she said. Unremarkable. Not in my career, I was always driven. But as a person, I could walk into a room and not have it mean anything. I could get on an elevator and it was just an elevator. She met his eyes. After everything meant something. Every accommodation, every ramp, every person who looked too long or looked away too fast. I became a statement whether I wanted to be or not. And the company, Ryan said quietly. Becoming that powerful, that was control. She looked at him sharply. Not criticism, he said. Observation. She sat with it. Yes, she said finally. If I was going to be a statement, I was going to be one on my terms. She paused. It worked. It worked extremely well. And it cost me things I didn't fully calculate at the time. Like what? She looked at him steadily. Like this, she said. Like being able to sit in a diner in the rain with someone and not have every part of my brain running a risk assessment. Is it, he asked, running a risk assessment? She considered him honestly. Quieter than usual, she admitted. He smiled at that, a real one, slow and warm, and she felt it move through her like the first solid note of a song she'd forgotten she knew. They stayed in that diner for 2 hours. They talked about his father who had died 3 years ago and who Ryan described as a difficult man who loved imperfectly but loved genuinely, which I've decided is enough. They talked about Clara's mother, who was 71 and lived in Phoenix, and who called every Sunday, and whom Clara answered for approximately 6 minutes before redirecting to business. They talked about what it meant to be the kind of person who takes care of everything and everyone, and quietly, systematically neglects themselves. My therapist, Ryan said, would call that a pattern. You see a therapist? She asked, and then caught herself. I'm sorry, that's not a surprising thing, You're surprised a maintenance worker sees a therapist, he said without heat. I'm surprised anyone voluntarily talks about themselves that honestly to another person, she said, which was the truth and more honest than she intended. He looked at her for a moment. You should try it sometime, he said. I tried it, she said. Once, in the first year after the accident. The therapist kept asking me how things made me feel. I kept giving her structural analyses. She paused. She told me I was using intellectualization as a defense mechanism. I told her she was correct and that I'd see her next week. I didn't see her next week. Ryan pressed his lips together, containing something. Go ahead, Clara said. He laughed, that open, unguarded laugh that she had started to understand was the realest thing about him. I'm not laughing at you, he said. You're laughing at me a little. I'm laughing because that is the most Clara Hale thing I have ever heard, he said. And I mean that with complete respect. She looked at him, and something happened in her chest that she had run out of ways to rationalize. It wasn't warmth exactly. It wasn't comfort exactly. It was closer to the sensation of setting something heavy down after carrying it for so long you'd forgotten it wasn't part of your body. Ryan, she said. Yeah. I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. He set his coffee down, gave her his full attention. I have spent the last 11 years building the most impenetrable version of myself I could manage, she said. I did it consciously, deliberately, and it served me. I won't pretend it didn't. But somewhere in the process of becoming untouchable, I lost the ability to want things, normally, the way people want things, without it becoming a strategic consideration. She held his gaze. And then you talked to me through an elevator intercom, she said, and told me exactly what was going to happen before it happened. And that was such a small thing, such an ordinary human thing, and it cracked something open that I thought was sealed. Ryan was very still. I don't know what this is, she said. I'm not going to pretend I do. I've been alone long enough that my reference points are probably unreliable. But I know that I look for reasons to be in the same building as you. I know that I read the maintenance log every morning. I know that Saturday is the day I look forward to most in my week, and that is not something I ever expected to be able to say. She paused. And I think you deserve to know that. Directly. Without subtext. The rain was still coming down outside the window. Pat refilled their coffee without being asked and withdrew with the discretion of a woman who understood she had walked into something real. Ryan looked at Clara for a long time. Can I respond now? He said. Yes. What you just described, he said, the looking for reasons, the maintenance log, Saturday. He paused. I do the same thing. From my side of it. He held her gaze. I request the Hale Dynamics building specifically when the rotation comes up. I've turned down 2 other assignments in the last month. She went very still. I think about you, he said simply. Not about what you represent, not about the situation. About you, the way you hold your coffee cup with both hands, the way you go quiet when something actually gets to you, the way you laugh like you've surprised yourself. He paused. I think about you the way you think about something that has become important to you. And I don't have a strategy for it either. Clara looked at him across the narrow diner table in the gray rain light, in a place that had nothing to do with who either of them was professionally, and she understood that this was the moment. Not the escalation of it, not the careful, managed approach to it. The moment itself. Then we should do something about it, she said. I think we should, he said. I don't know how to start. Neither do I, he said. But I'd rather figure it out with you than know how alone. She looked at her coffee, then at him. Saturday, she said. Not the market. Dinner. Something that is explicitly and unambiguously not a coincidence. He looked at her with something that took her a moment to identify, because she had not seen it directed at her in so long. Not admiration, she had that in abundance. Not respect, she had that too. It was tenderness. Yeah, he said. Saturday. Dinner. She nodded once crisply, like a decision had been ratified. But her hands around the coffee cup were not entirely steady. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. Which was, she thought, exactly right. They walked out of the diner, into rain that had softened to a mist, and he walked with her to where her driver was waiting, and this time when they stopped at the car, there was no charged silence. There was just ease, the particular unfamiliar ease of something that has stopped being a question. She went to the car. He raised that same unhurried hand in goodbye. She nodded. Saturday came. And Saturday was different from the market, and different from the diner, and different from every other moment they'd shared, because this time there was no ambient justification. No HVAC inspection, no rain, no early hour making things casual by default. They went to a restaurant on the north side, her choice, because she knew the accessible entrance, and she was not willing to spend the evening navigating unexpected steps, and he was already there when she arrived at the table in a jacket he'd clearly pressed with his hands folded on the table, and his expression open. He stood when she came in, not performatively, just reflexively. A person raised to stand when someone arrives. You pressed your jacket, she said. You curled your hair, he said. She had. She was not going to acknowledge that she'd spent 40 minutes on it. Clara, he said as she settled at the table. Ryan, she said. For the record, he said, I'm a little nervous. She looked at him. Good, she said. So am I. Misery loves company. He laughed, and the nervousness dissolved like it had never been there, and they ordered, and they talked, and it was the easiest 2 hours she had spent in a seated formal setting in over a decade. He ordered the salmon. She ordered the steak. He asked her questions about her actual childhood, her actual interests, the things she liked before she became a brand, and she answered with a directness that surprised even herself. She liked jazz specifically. Miles Davis, specifically Kind of Blue, specifically the second track. She had wanted to be a civil engineer before she went into business. She thought about that sometimes. She thought about what she might have built if it had been bridges and overpasses instead of balance sheets. You still build things, he said. Companies, she said. Things, he said. Large, complex, interconnected things that people depend on. The material is different. The thinking isn't. She looked at him. I never thought of it that way, she said honestly. I know, he said. That's why I said it. After dinner outside the restaurant in the cool night air, her driver pulled up and Ryan stood beside her chair on the sidewalk, and they both looked at the car for a moment. I had a good time, he said. So did I, she said, which feels like an understatement. He smiled. Same time next Saturday. You don't have to ask, she said. He looked at her then fully openly, without the careful calibration that professional proximity required. And she looked back, and what passed between them in that moment was not words and was not gesture, but was something that both of them understood clearly. He reached down and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any particular ceremony. He simply took it and held it for a moment and then let go. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night," she said. She was in her car pulling away from the curb before she let herself feel the full weight of it. The warmth of his hand around hers. The completeness of the gesture. The way it had required nothing from her, no explanation, no justification, no strategic context. Just contact. Human and simple and real. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She did not cry. She did not need to. Something had been returned to her that she thought was gone for good, and grief and joy were not always easy to tell apart when they arrived together, which this did. What she did not know, sitting in the back of that car, looking at the city sliding past the windows, was that 6 days later, everything would become complicated in a way neither of them had anticipated or prepared for. 6 days later, the world would find out. And the world would have opinions. It always did. But what the world did not know, and what Clara had just begun to fully understand, sitting in that car with the ghost of his hand still warm around hers, was that she had not come this far through the accident, through the rebuilding, through 11 years of making herself into something the world could not touch in order to be frightened now. Not by cameras, not by board members, not by headlines, not by anything. She had survived worse. And this was not something she intended to survive. This was something she intended to keep. She just didn't know yet how loud she'd have to say it. She found out at the annual Hale Dynamics Leadership Summit 6 days later, in a room full of 500 people who had no idea they were about to witness something that none of them would forget. Clara arrived at the summit the way she arrived everywhere, precisely on schedule, completely composed, her public face perfectly arranged. She moved through the lobby while her executive team flanked her, and her assistant relayed last-minute updates, and everything was exactly as it always was. Except Ryan was there. He hadn't known she'd be there. It wasn't his event. He was on the building crew, handling AV logistics and backup power systems for the ballroom. She saw him across the lobby before he saw her, his back to her, talking into a radio with the calm efficiency that was as native to him as breathing. She stopped. Not because of surprise, because of something that happened in her body when she saw him, settling like a compass finding north. A sensation so simple and so true that it cut right through the noise of 500 people and 2 decades of professional armor and landed clean. She knew in that moment, with the certainty she brought to her best decisions, what she was going to do. Her assistant was still talking. Her COO was saying something about the opening remarks. The room was a controlled chaos of executives and investors and employees, all of it moving around her like water around stone. She turned to her assistant. "Diane," she said, "give me the stage microphone." Diane blinked. "I'm sorry." "The MC's microphone. Get it and bring it to me before the formal program starts." A pause. "Ms. Hale, the program is in 11 minutes. Diane." She said it quietly. "Please." Diane looked at her for a long moment, reading something in Clara's face that made her stop asking questions. She went and got the microphone. Clara held it in her lap and looked across the lobby to where Ryan was still talking into his radio. Still unaware, still completely and utterly himself, in a room full of people performing versions of themselves. She had spent 11 years becoming untouchable. She was about to choose in front of everyone to be touched. She moved toward him. The room didn't notice at first. Then it did gradually, the way a crowd notices something that doesn't fit the expected pattern. The CEO moving with purpose through the lobby away from her team toward the maintenance crew. People stopped talking. By the time she was 10 feet from him, the room had gone quiet enough that Ryan heard it, the particular silence of a crowd that had stopped what it was doing, and he turned. He saw her. He read her face instantly, the way he always did, and something moved across his expression. Recognition and something else. Something deeper that she couldn't fully name, but that she felt answer to her own. She raised the microphone, and in a voice that had commanded boardrooms and Senate hearings and earnings calls with institutional investors, Clara Hale spoke into the silence of 500 people. "Ryan Cooper," she said. He stood absolutely still. "Can I have a date with you?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. Clara counted them. Not because she was afraid she had moved past, afraid the moment she raised the microphone, but because silence in her experience was never empty. It was always full of something. In boardrooms, it was full of calculation. In negotiations, it was full of leverage. In courtrooms, when she'd testified, it was full of judgment. This silence was full of shock. Then someone's phone came up. Then another. Then a sound moved through the crowd, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur. Something between the two. The sound of 500 people, recalibrating what they thought they understood about the woman standing at the center of the room. Ryan had not moved. I was standing exactly where he'd been when he turned and saw her coming, radio in one hand, 15 feet of open lobby floor between them. And he was looking at her with an expression that Clara would spend a long time afterward trying to find the right word for. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was something closer to recognition. Like he'd known this was coming, not in the specific, not the microphone and the crowd, but the essential thing underneath it. Like he'd been waiting patiently for her to catch up to what he already knew. She held the microphone and she held his gaze, and she did not look at anyone else in the room. "I know this is not the standard format for this kind of question," she said, still into the microphone, still steady. "I know this room is full of people who have opinions about everything I do. I know there will be a story about this by morning." She paused. "I don't care about any of that. I care about asking the right person the right question before I lose my nerve." Another pause. "I haven't lost my nerve in 11 years. I'm not starting now." Ryan took 2 steps toward her. The crowd did not breathe. He reached her, took the microphone gently from her hand, not taking it away, just taking it from her, a transfer, a shared thing. And he looked at her for one long moment with everything visible in his face. No armor, no performance. Just Ryan Cooper from Indiana, who fixed broken things and brought canvas bags to farmers markets and told a woman in an elevator exactly what was coming before it happened. "Yeah," he said into the microphone. One word. The room erupted. Not with applause, though some people did applaud awkwardly, reflexively, the way people applaud at things that overwhelm them. Mostly it was noise. Volume. The sudden release of 500 people exhaling at the same time. Phones everywhere. Faces turned to each other. The rapid data processing of a crowd that had just witnessed something that did not fit any category they had available. Clara's COO. David Merritt was the first executive to reach her side. He was 53 years old, had been with the company for 7 years, and had the expression of a man who had just watched someone detonate a device he hadn't known was in the room. "Clara," he said very quietly, very close to her ear. "We need to talk." "Not now, David," she said. "The board is not in this room," she said. "And even if they were, they would wait." David stepped back. He knew that voice. Everyone in that building knew that voice. Ryan handed the microphone back to the MC, who received it with the expression of someone who has just been handed a live electrical wire and is unsure what the protocol is, and he turned back to Clara, and the crowd was still loud around them, but they were somehow in a pocket of quiet inside it. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "In front of all these people." "I know." He looked at her carefully. "Are you okay?" She thought about it genuinely, the way she'd learned from him, not performing the answer, but actually checking. "Yes," she said. "Surprisingly. Are you?" "I'm somewhere between stunned and—" He searched for the word grateful, he said. "Which is a strange combination." "This is going to be complicated," she said. I want you to know that going in. What I just did, it's going to generate attention. There will be a narrative. People will have things to say about both of us. I know, he said. It won't be flattering to you from some quarters. They'll make it about the disparity, the access. They'll invent motivations. Clara. I'm telling you what's coming, she said. Before it happens, the way you did for me. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know what's coming. I've known since the first morning in that elevator that this wasn't going to be simple if it became anything. He held her gaze. I'm still here. She nodded once. Saturday, she said. Saturday, he confirmed. David Merritt intercepted her before she reached the stage for her opening remarks, and he had the look of a man who had already been on his phone for the 11 minutes since the moment in the lobby. I've gotten 7 texts from board members, he said. Kaufman is already drafting something. Martin Kaufman was her longest-serving board member, a 70-year-old institutional investor who treated the company's reputation with the particular anxiety of a man whose net worth was directly tethered to it. What is Kaufman drafting? Clara said. I don't know exactly. Something about optics. Something about a conversation he'd like to have before. Tell Martin, Clara said evenly, that I will call him Thursday, that the company's quarterly numbers are strong, that no decision I make in my personal life has ever or will ever compromise my fiduciary responsibility to this board, and that I expect him to have read the Q2 projections before we speak. She looked at David. Can you relay that? David looked at her for a moment. Verbatim. Word for word. He paused, then he nodded. He had been with her long enough to know when she had made a decision and when she was still making one. This was the former. She gave her opening remarks exactly as planned. Her voice did not waver. Her data was precise. Her strategy was sharp. She was by every measurable standard completely in control. Afterwards, Diane handed her a printed list of media inquiries. 14. In 40 minutes. By the next morning, it was 63. By the following Monday, it was a story. Not the front page, she wasn't the president, but it lived in the business press with a virulence she recognized from hostile takeover coverage. Hale Dynamics CEO creates spectacle at company event. That was the polite version. The less polite version from a financial commentary site she normally found unreliable and now found infuriating. Is Clara Hale's judgment as impaired as her mobility? She read that one at 5:47 in the morning, sitting at her desk with her first coffee, and she felt something move through her that was sharp and cold, and not quite anger. Anger implied surprise. This was something more like confirmation of exactly the kind of thing she had known was coming, and had chosen to walk toward anyway. She forwarded the article to her legal team with 2 words, "Review, please." Then she called Ryan. It was early, 6:03. He picked up on the second ring. "You're awake," she said. "I start at 7, he said. "You okay?" "I wanted to check on you," she said. "Not myself, you." A brief pause. "I've had 4 people at the building ask me about it this morning already. 2 were congratulatory. One told me I should think carefully about what I was getting into. One guy from the 3rd floor crew basically implied I must have." He paused, chose his words, engineered the situation somehow, for personal gain. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Ryan. I'm not upset about it," he said. "People make up stories that make sense to them. I can't control that." A pause. "How about you?" She told him about the article, read him the headline. The silence on his end was different from his usual silences, shorter, tighter. "That's vicious," he said. "It's also predictable," she said, "and it won't be the last one." "Does it change anything for you?" She had expected him to ask about himself, whether she wanted to reconsider, whether the exposure was too much. She had a prepared answer for that question. She had not prepared for him to ask about her. "No," she said honestly. "It makes me angrier, which historically makes me more focused, not less. Good, he said. And there was something in his voice that she had not heard before, a steadiness that was different from his usual calm. This wasn't the calm of someone unaffected. This was the calm of someone who had decided something and was standing behind it. I want you to know, she said, that what was written about your motivations, that it was ever written at all. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for other people's ugliness, he said quietly. Ryan. Clara, I know who I am. I know why I'm here. He paused. Do you? She sat with the question. Yes, she said. Then that's enough, he said. That's all that's enough. She did not tell him that the call had undone something in her chest. A tight thing she hadn't fully known was there. She simply said she'd call him Thursday, and hung up, and sat for a long time in the blue early morning quiet of her office. Martin Kaufman called Thursday morning 6 minutes before she was scheduled to call him, which told her everything she needed to know about how the conversation was going to go. Clara. His voice had the particular warmth of a man who has rehearsed being reasonable. I want to start by saying that no one on the board questions your... Martin, she said. I'll save us both 20 minutes. Tell me what you actually want to say. A beat. The institutional investors are nervous, he said, dropping the warmth. 3 calls yesterday. The perception is that the summit event was impulsive. People are questioning whether what? Whether your judgment is whether you're in the right headspace to be running my own company, Clara said, which I built, which I've grown to $2.7 billion over 11 years. In a wheelchair, which I mention only because that headline apparently gave some people permission to say out loud what they've thought quietly for years. Kaufman was silent. Martin, she said, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly, because we've known each other long enough for that. Of course. If I had been standing at that summit, not in a chair standing, and I had asked a man out in front of the room, would this conversation be happening? A long silence. It would be happening differently, he said finally. How differently? It would be, they'd call it confidence, bold, charismatic. He paused, and to his credit, she heard something in his voice that might have been actual discomfort. I understand what you're saying. I know you do, she said. You're not a stupid man. That's why I'm going to tell you this directly. My personal life is my own. My record speaks for itself. If any investor wants to liquidate based on whom I choose to have dinner with, I will not lose a single night of sleep over it, and I will also note for the record that my Q2 numbers would make that a decision they regret. She paused. Tell them that. Not the last part. The rest. Kaufman was quiet for a moment. You're not going to slow this down, he said. It wasn't quite a question. No, she said. Another silence. The numbers really are strong, he said. They are, she said. I'll make some calls, he said. She hung up and looked at the Chicago skyline from her window and felt something she rarely let herself feel in business satisfaction. Not at the outcome exactly, at the clarity, at the knowledge that she had said precisely what she meant to precisely the right person without softening a single syllable of it. She called Ryan that evening. How'd it go? He asked. He'd known about the Kaufman call. Fine, she said. He'll manage it. You weren't worried. About Kaufman? About the investors? She paused. A little, but not enough to change anything. What were you most worried about? He asked. She thought about it honestly. That you would decide it wasn't worth it, she said quietly. That was the only thing I was actually worried about. A pause. Clara, he said. Yes, I turned down a reassignment today. Better building easier hours closer to home. 3rd time since February. His voice was even unhurried. I keep turning down reassignments. You want to know why? She didn't answer, but she was listening with her whole body. Because the thing I'm not willing to give up, he said, isn't the job. It's the 7:20 Thursday morning when I know you're going to show up in that hallway and say something that makes me think differently about everything for the rest of the day." He paused. "I'm not going anywhere. I need you to actually know that." She pressed the phone hard against her ear. "I know it," she said. And for the first time since the summit, she exhaled fully. The public noise did not disappear overnight. It took weeks. The media story went through its natural cycle. Initial shock, hot takes, counter-narratives, and finally the way these things go when there is no scandal to sustain them. Just a quiet and undramatic erosion as newer stories arrived. What the coverage never captured. What it was structurally incapable of capturing was the texture of what was actually happening between them. The Tuesday evening calls that ran long, because neither of them was willing to be the one to say goodnight first. The way Ryan had started leaving a note on her assistant's desk on Thursday mornings. Not messages, just small things, a coffee shop. He thought she'd like an article about civil engineering that he'd seen and thought she should read. The way Clara had started keeping the farmer's market peaches on her desk until they were overripe because she didn't want to move them. The way she had started slowly, unevenly to want things again. Not strategically, not as acquisitions or targets or benchmarks. Just to want them, plainly, like a person. She wanted to hear his voice in the morning. She wanted Saturday. She wanted to sit in a warm diner in the rain with no agenda and 2 cups of coffee and someone who asked her real questions and waited for real answers. She wanted to be the woman who had cracked open the wall she'd built, not the one who'd retreated behind it. She realized one evening sitting at her desk at 8 o'clock with the city dark outside to stop being alone. Not because she couldn't manage alone. She could. She had. She had done it brilliantly for 11 years. But she didn't want to anymore. And that was the difference. Not the circumstances, not the options. The want. It had come back to her. Quietly. Through an elevator intercom and a paper bag of peaches, and a man who knocked on open doors because he thought it was the right thing to do. She had not anticipated it. She had not engineered it. It had simply arrived the way true things do, not announced, not scheduled, just suddenly present where there had been absence before. She was on the phone with Ryan when her assistant knocked and said the board had formally confirmed the quarterly review and there were no outstanding concerns. "Hold on," she told Ryan. She looked at Diane. "Tell them the Q3 numbers will be just as good," she said. Diane nodded and withdrew. "Sorry," Clara said into the phone. "Board stuff." "It's settled," she said. "All of it." "Good," he said, and then simply, "So what are we doing Saturday?" She smiled. It was not her CEO smile. It was not her Forbes cover smile. It was not the smile she used in negotiations or earnings calls or congressional testimony. It was just a smile. Real and small and entirely her own. "Surprise me," she said. A pause. "I can do that," he said. He surprised her with the Art Institute, not a gala, not a private after-hours event with catered food and a guest list. Though Clara suspected that one call from her office could have arranged exactly that. Ryan had simply looked up the accessible hours, bought 2 regular tickets the same way anyone would, and texted her the address Friday night with nothing else attached. She was there before him, which she hadn't planned on, and she sat near the entrance in the gray October morning light and watched people come through the doors. Families, students, older couples moving slowly with their hands close, but not quite touching. And she felt something that she had not felt in a public space in a very long time. Ordinary. Not invisible, not performing, just ordinary. A person in a building on a Saturday morning with nowhere more important to be. Ryan arrived at 9:03 with 2 coffees and no apology for the 3 minutes. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early," she said. "It's a character flaw." "It's not a flaw," he said. "It means you care." He handed her the coffee. "Black. No options on the side this time. I know how you take it now." She accepted the cup and did not say anything about the particular quiet intimacy of being known that simply. They moved through the museum the way they moved through everything at their own pace, without agenda. He stopped at things that interested him and said what he thought about them without performing sophistication. He didn't have, and she said what she thought without performing accessibility. She didn't feel, and the combination of those two honest voices in front of painting after painting was, she thought, one of the better conversations she'd had in years. He stopped in front of a hopper. A woman sitting alone at a counter, coffee in front of her, light coming through a window. "This used to make me sad," he said. "Used to. Now it just looks like someone having a moment to themselves, which isn't sad, it's just a moment." He looked at it for a beat. "I think I used to read loneliness into everything. After my marriage ended, Clara had known the broad shape of it, divorced several years ago, amicably enough, two people who had grown in directions that no longer overlapped. He had mentioned it twice briefly without drama. She had not pushed. "Do you still," she asked, "read loneliness into things?" He considered the painting for another moment. "Less," he said. "A lot less recently." She looked at the woman in the painting, the solitary coffee, the window light. "I used to see myself in things like that," she said. "Not sadly, just accurately. As confirmation." She paused. "I don't anymore. That's new." He looked at her. "Good new or disorienting new?" he asked. "Both," she said honestly. "Mostly good." They had lunch at a small place near the museum. His choice, a booth in the back accessible without the awkward navigation of a host who didn't know what to do. She had started noticing over the past weeks that Ryan researched places before he suggested them. Not obviously, not in a way that drew attention to itself. But the evidence was always there. The right entrance, the right table, the space she needed without anyone having to ask. He did it the way he did everything, quietly, practically without making it about himself. She mentioned it over lunch. "You look places up," she said, "before we go." He didn't look caught. "Yeah," he said simply. "How long have you been doing that?" He thought about it. "First Saturday market. I checked the path width on the city accessibility map before I mentioned it to you." She looked at him. "That was the first time you mentioned it," she said. "You'd already checked." "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. "But I wanted it to be right if you did." She set down her fork and looked at him with something that had passed entirely beyond the reach of her usual composure. "Ryan," she said. "It's not a big thing." "It is," she said. "It is a big thing. Not the research. The fact that you didn't tell me about it. You didn't want credit. You just did it." He looked at her steadily. "That's what care looks like," he said. "It's not supposed to be announced." She looked at her plate. She had been cared for in her life, in the transactional sense. Teams of people managed her schedule, her security, her logistics. She had been accommodated professionally and legally and architecturally. She had been handled by executives and publicists and board members with enormous competence. She had not been cared for like this. Not in this way. Not by someone who checked path widths on a city map because they wanted it to be right if she came. "I don't know how to receive this gracefully," she said, which was the most honest thing she could offer. "You don't have to be graceful," he said. "You just have to let it in." She looked up at him. "I'm working on that," she said. "I know," he said. "You're doing better than you think." The weeks that followed had a quality Clara had no existing framework for. Not the frantic forward motion of building something. Not the controlled pressure of a negotiation. Something slower and more demanding than either the daily, ordinary, unspectacular work of letting someone into the life you'd sealed shut. It was not always easy. There were evenings when her instinct was to go quiet, to retreat into work, into the familiar pressure of a deadline that required nothing from her emotionally. There were moments when the exposure of it being known, being seen, having someone in possession of the real version of her, rather than the curated one, felt like standing in a wind she couldn't calculate the direction of. Ryan did not push on those evenings. He had an instinct for when she needed space that was as accurate as his instinct for when she needed the opposite. He would say goodnight a little earlier without drama, without making it mean something it didn't. And the next day, he would call at 6:03, as if nothing had happened, because for him, nothing had. She was allowed to have hard evenings, and that didn't change anything. She told him once on one of those evenings when she had gone quiet, and then emerged from it, that she wasn't used to people who didn't keep score. "What do you mean?" he asked. "When I withdraw," she said, "most people file it, save it, use it later as evidence of something that I'm cold or difficult or closed off. They build a case." "I'm not building a case," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what I'm telling you. I know, and I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "It's just how I am." "Why?" she asked. "You've had people let you down. I know you have." "Yeah," he said. "But I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to make new people pay for what old people did." He paused. That seemed fair. To them and to me. She sat with that. "That's a remarkably healthy way to be," she said. "It took work," he said. "I didn't arrive here naturally. I made decisions." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind where you decide what kind of person you want to be," he said, "and then you just try to be that person, every day, even when it doesn't come easy." He paused. "You know how to do that. You've been doing it your whole career." She thought about that. "I've been doing it for the company," she said. "Start doing it for yourself," he said. She did, not all at once, not in any dramatic definable moment, but incrementally, the way real change actually happens in the accumulation of small choices made daily in the direction of the person you are trying to become. She started leaving the office before 9. Not every night, but some nights. She started answering her mother's Sunday calls, without the 6-minute redirect to business, started actually talking, listening, asking questions about her mother's life in Phoenix, with the genuine interest of someone who had remembered belatedly that the people who loved her were not a network to be managed, but a tether to something real. She started playing Miles Davis in her office in the mornings, which made Diane smile in a way she tried to conceal and failed. She started reading again. Not industry reports, not white papers, not strategic analyses. Fiction. She had not read a novel in 7 years. She started with one that Ryan recommended, a quiet book about a man rebuilding a house by hand, and she read it over 3 weekends and called him after she finished it and said, "I understand why you gave me this." And he said, "I thought you might." The board settled. The media moved on. Martin Kaufman called in November to say that the Q3 numbers were, and he used the word she had predicted, strong, and that the institutional investors had no outstanding concerns. His voice had the particular tone of a man who has been proven wrong about something and is being decent about it. "Thank you, Martin," she said. "Clara," he said before she hung up. A pause. "I hope you're well. I mean that personally, not professionally." She was briefly surprised. "I am," she said. "Thank you." And she meant it in a way she had not been able to mean it in a very long time. Ryan left the Hale Dynamics building in December. It was his choice, made deliberately for reasons he explained to her on a Wednesday evening with the directness that was as native to him as breathing. "I don't think I can keep working in your building," he said. She went still. "Why?" "Because I want this to be real," he said, "between us. And it's hard to keep it real when every interaction has a professional frame around it. When I'm signing in at the lobby desk and you're the CEO on the 32nd floor, and there are people watching and filing everything." He met her gaze. "I don't want to be the maintenance worker who's dating the boss. I want to be Ryan, who's with Clara. And I think I need a different building to do that in." She held his gaze. "You thought this through," she said. "I think everything through," he said. "You know that." She did. It was one of the things she trusted most about him. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I've had an offer from a facilities management company. Commercial buildings across the loop. Better pay, better hours. The guy I interviewed with is straightforward." He paused. It's a good move independent of all this. But you wouldn't be making it right now if not for all this, she said. No, he said honestly. I wouldn't. She looked at him. I don't want you to make decisions based on Clara. He said it quietly, firmly, the way he said things when he needed her to stop and actually hear him. I'm not making this decision for you. I'm making it for us. There's a difference. She closed her mouth. Okay, she said. Okay. He looked slightly surprised. Not that she'd agreed without a counter-argument. I said okay, she said. I trust your judgment. She paused. That's new for me. Trusting someone else's judgment about their own life without trying to optimize it. He looked at her for a moment. How does it feel? He asked. She considered it honestly. Right, she said. It feels right. He started the new job in January. The lobby desk at Hale Dynamics, where he had signed in every morning for 2 years, was maintained by someone else now. The maintenance log she had started checking every morning was once again just a maintenance log. But Ryan called at 6:03 every morning without fail. And Saturday was still Saturday, on a Sunday in February, 9 months after a malfunctioning elevator had stopped 6 feet off the ground and changed both of their lives in ways neither could have mapped in advance. Clara sat in her office in the quiet of an afternoon. She had deliberately left unscheduled, and she looked at the city, and she took stock. The company was healthy. Stronger actually than it had been 12 months ago. The Q4 numbers had come in above projection, and the acquisition she'd been negotiating since spring had finally closed. Her team was sharp. Her board was settled. The press had moved on entirely. None of that was what she was taking stock of. She was taking stock of herself. She had, and this still surprised her when she said it plainly, even inside her own mind, she had a person. She had someone who called at 6:03 and researched accessible paths before he mentioned places and brought canvas bags to farmers markets and told her what was coming before it happened. She had someone who did not keep score, who did not build cases, who had decided what kind of person he wanted to be, and then tried to be that person every day, including toward her. She had someone who looked at her, not the wheelchair, not the company, not the profile, not the story, but at her. Clara, specifically, like she was the particular person he had chosen to know. She had not let herself have this. She had. Then, for 11 years, she had decided unconsciously and then very consciously that this was not available to her, that the trade-off for what she had built was the absence of this. That you could not have the empire and the ordinary Sunday morning and the farmer's market peaches and the man who knocked on open doors. She had been wrong. Not wrong. The way she was wrong about a market calculation which was fixable and impersonal. Wrong in the deep, private, years-long way that costs you something real. Wrong in the way that meant she had spent 11 years without something she didn't have to be without. She sat with that. She let it be what it was, which was both a loss and the end of one. Her phone lit up. Ryan. She picked up. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Thinking," she said. "About work." "No." "Good." A pause. "I'm making dinner. You should come." She looked at the Chicago skyline, at the city she had conquered and run and shaped and made into the backdrop of a life she was only now at 44, learning to actually live inside of. "I'll be there in 45 minutes, she said. "I'll set the table," he said. She hung up and looked around the office, the desk, the windows, the clean lines of an empire built on will and grief and relentless forward motion. And she thought about a woman who had once sat in a stopped elevator in the dark and breathed and waited for the light to come back on. She was still that woman. She was also now something more. She was someone who had a person who set the table. She rolled toward the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened smoothly, normally the way they had every day since the repair 11 months ago. And she went in and the doors closed, and she went down. When she came through the lobby, Marcus at the security desk said, "Have a good evening, Ms. Hale," the way he did every night. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. And then, "How's your daughter? You mentioned she had a recital." He blinked a small, surprised blink, the look of a man who did not expect to be remembered. "She was great," he said. "Thank you for asking." "Good," Clara said. "That's good." She went out into the February evening. It was cold and clear, the way Chicago in winter can be, when the wind is still clean and sharp and full of light from 1,000 windows above and 1,000 headlights below the city, doing what cities do. Indifferent and magnificent and alive in the way that only places with too many people and too much history can manage. Her driver pulled up. She went to the car. 43 minutes later, she was at Ryan's door. He opened it before she knocked. He'd heard the car, or he'd been watching. She wasn't sure which, and didn't ask. He was in a flannel shirt, and his kitchen showed evidence of actual cooking, and somewhere in the back of the apartment, Miles Davis was playing. Kind of Blue, track 2. She looked at him standing in the doorway. "You put on the record," she said. "I looked up which track," he said. "You mentioned it once." She had mentioned it once, months ago, in passing. In the way you mention small things, you assume no one catalogs. He had catalogued it. She looked at him for a long moment in the light of the open door. "Ryan Cooper," she said. "Clara Hale," he said. "I want you to know something," she said. "Tell me." "I have made hundreds of decisions in my career that I would defend to any board, any investor, any journalist who ever asked." She held his gaze. "This is the one I am most certain of." He looked at her with that expression she had learned to read, the one that was not quite a smile, not yet, but that meant one was coming, the one that meant she had gotten somewhere real. "You know what I think," he said. "Tell me." "I think you knew that from the elevator," he said. "You just needed the rest of the time to catch up to it." She thought about that, about the malfunction and the orange light and the voice through the intercom that told her exactly what was coming before it happened. About the first moment she had understood that this person was different, not because he was perfect, not because the timing was right, but because he was honest in a world that had taught her to expect performance and present in a life that had become an exercise in controlled absence. "Maybe," she said. "Come inside," he said. "Dinner's getting cold." She went inside. The door closed behind her. And Clara Hale, billionaire CEO, the most powerful woman in a building she no longer needed to conquer, sat at a kitchen table set for two, in a flannel and Miles Davis kind of evening that no profile had ever captured and no headline had ever found. And she ate dinner with the man who had looked at her through an elevator intercom and asked simply, before everything else, "Are you okay?" She had not been okay. She was now. Not because he had fixed her, she had never needed fixing, and she had built an empire on the proof of that. But because he had shown her in the patient and unhurried way of someone who understands that real things take real time. That being untouchable and being whole are not the same thing. That you can survive alone brilliantly, and still choose when the right person arrives not to. That the bravest thing she had ever done was not the testimony before Congress, or the hostile board she had outlasted, or the empire she had built from a hospital bed. It was rolling across a crowded lobby with a microphone and saying 4 words to one man who had already quietly and without announcement changed everything, and the truest thing she now knew. The thing she carried into every morning at 6:03, and every Saturday, and every ordinary evening at a kitchen table set for two, was this. The woman who had survived everything had finally at 44 decided to live.